I want to thank you for joining us. And by us, I mean me. This is really weird. When Bishop approached me, I honestly thought he was joking. I was like, huh? Are you sure? And then I went to a friend and I was like, oh my goodness, help me pray about this. And she's like, I've been waiting for you to tell me. I knew that you were going to be doing this kind of thing. And I was like, oh, Lord. Okay. Maybe a little warning next time would be good. Either way, I'm here and I am thankful that my bishop and the pastoral team sees something that they can work with, that they trust the Lord, that something good will come from this mess. I am going to talk tonight about someone that's not talked about a lot, someone who I think is easily overlooked. I'm going to give it a title. I technically have two, but I'm going to give you the one that doesn't give away your name yet, as the God who sees even me. I'm going to start. I have a bit of a reading, and then I'll pause and do my notes, and then I'll read a little bit more. I'm going to go to Genesis 16, and I'm going to read, 1 to 6 probably, and then we'll pick up and read 7 down to the end, I think. We're going to start with 16 and 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold, now the Lord has restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. And the Lord judged between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. So from the reading, I'm assuming you realize I'm talking about Hagar. She's very overlooked, but had a huge role. Hagar was an Egyptian slave owned by Abram and Sarai, or as we would know them later, Abraham and Sarah. She worked as Sarai's handmaid, and she had no say in what she did. Sarai was old and had trouble believing that God's promise was not just to Abraham, but to her. And so she was like, I don't know if God's promise can be done. I'm old. So she decided to take matters into her own hands. Sarai made the decision to give Hagar to Abram to have a baby with him that the Lord had withheld her from having. Even though the Lord had promised descendants to Abraham and Sarah as innumerable as the stars in the heavens or the sand on the beach. I would personally assume that Hagar wasn't okay with the decision that was made about her. That would change the course of her entire life. But what could she do? She was a slave. Either way, after she became pregnant, she became arrogant. We know that Sarai wasn't kind to Hagar, even though we know that Hagar was pregnant with the baby that Sarah had so desperately wanted. And so Sarai dealt hardly with Hagar. Hardly here, by the way, means to afflict, to chasten, to humble, to hurt, or to weaken. And that happens more often than we would like to admit. But this is where the story takes a turn that no one expected. Hagar ran away and had an encounter that would change everything. Bear in mind, though, that this is a time when women were seen as disposable pieces of property by some, and Hagar was a slave from a completely different nation that worshiped so many other gods. So she was probably looked down on even more. But there was someone that could never see her as anything other than precious, and that someone was God. So now I'm going to go back to Genesis 16, 7 to at least 13. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence comest thou? And whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for the multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your afflictions. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all of his brethren. And she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, have I also here looked after him that sees me? So, an angel of the Lord, God himself, steps onto the scene and finds Hagar at a fountain of water in the wilderness and asks her two questions. Where did you come from, and where do you intend to go? All that Hagar can say to this angel of the Lord, the visible manifestation of God in the Old Testament, is, I've run from my mistress. The Lord tells her to go back to her mistress and submit. But then he takes it a step further by saying that her descendants, the descendants of a slave, would be exceedingly multiplied, that she would have a son, and then God named her unborn son Ishmael. Now, fun fact, I found this so cool. This is the first time in the Bible that God would name someone before they're born. Here are a few others, but by far not all, that would be named before they were born. Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah. Solomon, the son of King David and Bathsheba. Josiah, one of the righteous kings of Israel. John the Baptist, and Jesus. So she did something extraordinary. After God named her son, she also gave a name to God. She calls him El Roi, the God who sees. And if I can take this from the Amplified, one of my other favorites, she says, the God who never sleeps, the God who is aware, the God who is ever present and watching over me. Now, what she leaves the spring knowing is that the God who created everything, the universe, the stars, herself, he saw her in her distress, and he came down and wanted her to know that while she was in a situation that she didn't want, and she definitely didn't choose for herself, that he still saw her. God cares and would sustain her and her child in the days and the years to come. And God gave her a daily reminder of his goodness and his faithfulness, because you know what Ishmael means? It means God hears. So Hagar ran from her mistress to the wilderness, disheartened, hurting and alone, but she leaves full, knowing that God heard her and saw her and answered her. So later in Genesis 21, Ishmael's 14 or 15. This is after Sarai had become Sarah, and Abram had become Abraham. Hagar and Ishmael are sent away with some bread and some water, because there was strife between Hagar and Sarah and Ishmael and Isaac. And, Ishmael and Hagar weren't quite as needed as they thought they would be, as they were led to assume. Even Abraham, who I assume loved his firstborn son, he had to send him away because he wasn't the son of the promise. So Sarah had to Abraham send him away. And along the way, he gives him some bread and some water, and they become lost. They use up all the resources, all the bread, all the water. And Hagar looks at her son, he's probably bigger than her by then, 14, 15. They sprout up. And she looks at him and she thinks, I don't have what you need. You're going to die. And so she puts him under some shrubs along the way, and she goes a bit further so she doesn't have to see him die. Hagar despairs, and she forgot in that moment of desperation that Yahweh El Roi sees her at all times. He is ever present and listening to the cries of her and her son. And he asked her from heaven, what troubles you? Fear not, for I hear your son. God reminds her of his promises to make a great nation of her descendants and shows her a well that she can use to save Ishmael. So, as I come to the end of my musings, I'm going to finish with a psalm, and I want you to take hope and rest in the comfort that in any and all circumstances, whether it's something you chose or something that was chosen for you, that Yahweh El Roi, he's not just the God that appeared to a slave lost in the wilderness many, many, many years ago. He is and always will be the God who watches over us. He will never leave us. He is the God who hears our cries and delights in helping us. He brings light, hope, and joy into the places of darkness and despair. He comforts and speaks peace, and he is waiting to come help us. So let me finish with my psalm. Psalm 116, 1 and 2. I love the Lord, because he hath heard my voice and my supplications. Because he has inclined his ear unto me, therefore will I call upon him as long as I live. That's all I have. That probably wasn't as long as it should be, but thank you for joining. I hope that you take this to heart, that when you feel so lost, that you know that he is ever present. He is right here, and he is waiting for you to reach to him, to call on him. Thank you.